on, Alicia, in a Goldilocks, how to get it just right. I am very excited for you to meet my special guest today, all the way from Sydney, Australia, Lisa Coletta. Welcome to the Goldilocks community. And we cannot wait, thank you. We cannot wait to have this insightful and timely conversation. Today's theme is going to be how to combine heart-centered leadership with responsible governance. And this is such an important theme for our times and also for us as a Goldilocks community. What is Goldilocks reminding us? She's reminding us of the importance of being centered, coming from that place of balance so that we know how to get things just right. It's not about my way or your way, what works for one person or the other. How do we show up in a way that we're not too hot, not too cold, not too hard, not too soft? And how do we bring our heart and soul into this as empathetic, caring, compassionate human beings who have a larger purpose? And while we show up with our heart, how do we balance the centeredness? And to me, the best definition I like of governance is from Sir Adrian Cadbury. Sir Adrian Cadbury talks about, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sir Adrian Cadbury talks about the importance of governance in a slightly different way. He defines governance as the importance of balancing the interest of the individual, the organization, and the society. And when all three are in sync, there is harmony, and the organization, the society, and the individuals, everybody gets lifted up. In my mind's eye, that is like a three-legged stool. The stool is only functional when all three legs are equal in strength and equal in length, right? So if the society is not as enlightened and as strong and it's firm in its belief and can take perspective, there's going to be a governance failure. If the organization is greed-filled and subverts society or the individuals, then there's going to be a governance failure. And if the society doesn't care about the individual or the organization's ability to thrive, there's going to be a governance failure. So it doesn't matter which leg fails, the system will fail. And so the beauty of this is the need to have everybody lifted up in a place where the society, the organization, and the individuals all come together to play and engage in a meaningful way with their heart and their mind so that we can build a more equitable society, a more resilient society that can stand the challenges life brings us, and the entire ecosystem can thrive and evolve. To have this amazing conversation with me, Lisa, welcome to the episode, and I am so glad you stayed up till 1 o'clock Sydney time to join this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Cass. I really appreciate it.
So as we get started, governance is not a space where any of us grow up saying, I'm going to go into. It is a space we get to as we progress in our careers and we see what's working, what's not working, what needs to happen for the ecosystem to be functional. What was your journey to get here? Because I'm sure there is a story there.
Oh, yeah, look, there most definitely is. And you're absolutely right. Governance typically, from a leader's experience standpoint, tends to be an add-on to their existing roles. And it also tends to be, as you mentioned, when there are failures and things aren't quite working the way they need to. And leaders over time tend to kind of evolve into the space of recognizing that governance is a really important element. For me, my journey is a really interesting one because I started off at, lower levels of the organization as a business analyst. And during my development and my learning and my mentoring, I was finding that I was gravitating more and more towards applying and demonstrating the delivery of great governance in the organizations that I was working in. And that actually came through the process of ISO quality certification in the organizations that I worked in. So I actually started looking at process and how process was actually sticking on the ground in different organizations that I was working in. And over time, I found myself being the go-to person who was able to show, not tell. And that's one of the really great important things about governance. It's not a tell me process, it's a show me process. How is the upper level policy and procedure and frameworks being applied at local levels? And I just found over time, Cass, that I was more and more drawn to that area. And over time, I ended up managing multiple governance frameworks and delivering and defining how those frameworks could effectively not just evolve, but also really stick well within the culture and within the mindsets of the leaders in the organizations as well. And I ended up owning, as I said, multiple frameworks and delivering them across large organizations. And that's how I got there.
Interesting. And so you tend to look at the world of governance differently because of the way you got to that, right?
Absolutely.
So talk to me and talk to the audience about how you look at governance and how the way you look at governance helps you bring people to the table to a conversation, because that is part of the art, right? The art of your craft is to invite them without feeling threatened, because there's such a punitive, fear-based approach to governance. And if we can help overcome that, then we truly are setting the stage up for a much more heart-centered way to approach this ecosystem balance.
Oh, look, absolutely. I definitely agree. And for me, there's a couple of aspects to applying great governance in organizations. The first aspect is really recognizing that governance is actually an underlying part of every person's role in an organization. It's not just the leader's job. It's not just the board's job. It's actually an underlying foundational element to every single role in the business, because that ecosystem relies on every person. So that's the first aspect. The second aspect for me is that it's one of those things where I like to define governance as defining lines of accountability at different levels of the organization. And to enable that to occur really effectively and drawing these really nice, clean lines, what has to happen is that everyone needs to be clear about what space they play in. And those leaders that are defining those lines need to come from a really, really great true heart intention perspective, so that every aspect, in your example around Cadbury's definition, is actually delivered effectively without that, the three legs of that chair actually, being equal and being equally strong. So intentions are really quite fundamental as well. And I guess to give you some context, I spend a lot of my time really cutting through, and I apologize if I'm about to swear, I actually spend a lot of my time cutting through all that corporate bullshit that people don't like to, waste their time on. And you tend to feel when governance isn't right before you see it. You can just navigate through the business and just know that, simple things and easy decisions are not simple or easy in some environments. And that's because the governance environment, in fact, there's this perception that the bullshit is really the corporate governance environment. But in actual fact, corporate governance has been used like a weapon for individuals' own personal gain. And that's that one of those legs on that three-legged chair, right? Individuals actually drive perverse outcomes using the governance frameworks for personal gain, for their own agendas, and to deliver outcomes that are not really truly in the best interest of everyone involved. And
interesting you say that, right? When I look at governance failure in every sphere of our society, 8 out of 10 times the governance failure happens from my profession, from the finance world,
Finance.
right? Whether it's Enron, whether it's WorldCom, whether it's Arthur Andersen, whether it's the subprime crisis, right? So you have these folks, and research shows that folks who self-select technology and accounting don't like people. So when you have professions who start with not liking people and who just want to work with machines and numbers and coding, right? And they're in fields where they are logical, and black or white accounting especially is a black or white field. And the United States especially doesn't look at a CFO role as a more rounded role. They normally have traditional accountants coming into a CFO role. But people don't realize accounting, financial accounting and public accounting is a world of black or white, and it's only telling the history in black and white terms. It's like you want the person who only looks at the rearview mirror to drive the car forward. And there are only two places it can go, the morgue or the cemetery or the emergency room. Whereas most of the other world, rest of the world, tends to look at a CFO as a finance professional who brings economics and psychology to the table in addition to accounting, because ultimately the ramification is the human choice making. The human psychology has a lot to do with it. And when the CFOs are disjointed, they don't bring the humanity or heart-centeredness to decision making. And when you make decision based on numbers, it doesn't compute to how people are going to choose. Talk to me a little bit about how do you deal with this world of CFOs who hold the purse strings?
Yes.
And they only care about the numbers, and they're driving looking at the rearview mirror, and they don't see not just the tip of the iceberg, they don't see the depth of the iceberg.
Yes. Yes, it is a really big risk for organizations to have CFOs that have that type of mindset, Cass, because in a lot of cases, they're actually doing the organization, as you said, a really, really great disservice, because you don't drive a car by looking through the rearview mirror. Having a really, really clear picture of what that GPS is actually saying and what the organization is actually driving towards is really, really important. It does impact the insights and the analysis that's undertaken looking through that rearview mirror. What it also does as well is that it actually sends a very, very strong and sometimes perverse message throughout the organization from a very, very senior level. And the knock-on effect to CFO's focus in that way doesn't just impact the finance team, because the CFO function has an interface and ramifications across the whole executive. It also cuts across to the board environment as well. And I really believe strongly about what tone we actually set from the top. And depending on the personality of those individuals, they can really heavily affect that tone setting culture around where we're actually focusing and what's actually important. Because, because of that concept that the numbers don't lie, and because it is a black and white, this theory around it being a black and white, black and white function, it can be really, really incredibly dangerous. And I guess it's one of those things too, Cass. Let's face it, corporate governance is not sexy. It's not one of those things that really everyone gets into, yet it's an area that I do specialize in. So when I come across individuals who have this, I guess, perspective or this view, there really is a great opportunity for us to actually work through what is the broader context around their role, and also take a really good look at the scope of their role and how what success looks like for their role beyond reporting the numbers and reporting those financial, the interpretation of that historical financial outcome. So it does, it does take quite a bit of time, and it has real conversation ramifications. There's no avoidance. There's no opportunity for avoidance around some of the realities.
No. And the subprime crisis brought to you by the financial services sector of the United States.
Yeah.
Years later, there are communities that still haven't come out of it, right?
No,
So
that's
the
right.
ramifications are far outreaching, and individuals making short-term profit-making choices because their role is tied to short-term profits, but the existence of the organization is long-term value creation. It's intentionally set up for that push and pull, but when the executives make that selfish choice and governance failure happens, especially through the financial services sector, the ramification is global. To me, it is worse than a pandemic like COVID, because with COVID, once you have the vaccinations and you have the remedies, you can move forward. With an economic crisis, what is lost is permanently lost, and not everybody can get out of it, right? So having been a CFO, having implemented the Sarbanes-Oxley regulations to adhere to governance post-Enron, this is such a near and dear issue to me. And I want to overlay the push and pull that happens between finance and HR, right? The employees think that HR is a people-centric function, but in reality, HR is the protector of the executive entity and the corporation. Protecting the employee is the last choice on that totem pole. So employees get caught up. I've been in organizations where employees see that the organization is doing something wrong, but they're afraid to go to HR because if you go to HR, you're going to get in trouble. So here we have a finance function that's supposed to set up long-term viability, and HR function that's supposed to technically be a resource for all human capital, but neither of them function the way they should. And then so employees say, you know what, it's just a job. I'm going to do what I'm asked to do. And then they fall prey to that same culture. How do we?
Yeah, look, it's a really interesting phenomenon, and it's we're seeing it quite heavily now around this concept around silent quitting. I'm sure you've heard that language being used quite a bit at the moment. Individuals are at the point where they're not leaving the organization, they're just not delivering on the outcomes. They're sticking around because they have to, not because they want to. And it's very, very frustrating and debilitating not to have a voice. And HR is actually there for that purpose. And it's actually a really, really strong disservice to the organization. And from a shareholder standpoint, it's actually something that is it's a huge challenge. It's one of those things where when organizations take that really pure view and look at governance as being a compliance function, tick the box compliance, and the knock-on effects to not recognizing that governance, when it's working really well in an organization, is an amazing ecosystem of governing insights that effectively provides transparency and input into decision making. So if you want a really great organization that has that utilizes its governance framework effectively, and it's using that governance ecosystem, those insights and perspectives are fed into every decision that gets made. And that the outcomes of that and the outputs from that are far more than tick the box compliance. So they're not actually getting what they really need. And, shareholders do have an expectation that that the organization's value is not just maintained, but also improved. And something as fundamental as the application of risk management. And when I say risk management, not tick the box risk management, we're really getting clear on what we need to worry about and what is controlled and managed and what isn't, and where to put our resources effectively. It's a really important aspect of decision making and being clear about what position we're in before we actually take risk or step up and take on opportunities as well. So
I think it's brilliant you tied governance to risk management. I tend to, I first became a CFO at Aon Risk.
Yeah.
And so I was implementing SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley, but we were also working with the entire world on their risk management. And in our consultative approach, we looked at governance as an enterprise-wide risk management tool, right? because it's not something that's going to meet your compliance threshold for materiality.
That's right.
But it is going to be one of those silent killers that traverses the organization function by function by function, magnifies and implodes. So it's not something that's going to happen, meaning the probability of it happening is not that large. But when it happens, the catastrophic effect is guaranteed.
Absolutely.
And so we started having conversations about, don't just look at the probability of something happening. When that happens, what is the effect? And if it's catastrophic, then you need to mitigate for it.
Absolutely. And that decision making around where to utilize your resources to manage that risk is really important from a proactivity standpoint and not a reactivity standpoint. So a lot of organizations, I find, tend to forget that risk management is really fundamentally managing what could happen before it happens, so that they can continue focusing on the key objectives and delivering key outcomes in the business. And whenever they've got to stop focusing on what they're moving towards, what that GPS is actually telling them, the more time they spend not doing that and more time they spend firefighting, the longer it takes for them to achieve the outcomes and the objectives that they want to deliver on. And so they've got this constant dynamic where they're trying to move forward, but at the same time, these interferences keep stopping them, and they have to refocus their energy on mitigating that risk or that issue. And sometimes it can be hard because you've already got momentum moving you towards those goals, and you're still trying to deliver on those goals at the same time as trying to manage the risk at the same time. And it actually exhausts your organization. There can only be so much change. There can only be so much capacity within any business, and the knock-on effects can be really, really high. And typically, achieving your outcomes and your objectives ends up being the victim. You end up spending more time and money managing things not happening that you don't want to happen than you do actually focusing on the things that you do want to happen. So it can be
the notion that an ounce of prevention.
Oh, look, absolutely. And I've known and seen organizations where they spend more time firefighting because the fire is, it was clearly there when they did their risk assessment, and they chose to, not recognize that throwing a little bit of time at mitigating that risk or that issue would actually save them in the long run, and they're choosing not to because they don't feel the probability of it occurring is very high. But if it does, the knock-on effect is quite significant, and it just derails them and misaligns them towards their goals. And of course, from a pure, sorry, Cass?
It also affects the morale.
Exactly.
And gets employees to a place where they don't trust. It's no longer a psychologically safe place, and people are just marking time, right? So I recall my time in the financial services sector, in the banking sector, just before the subprime crisis. And the message I heard from the employee base continuously is, Cass, don't worry about it. All we do is we say yes in meetings, and we come back and we don't do what they tell us to do because we know it's wrong.
Yeah.
And then all we need to do is sit tight because, and they quote the Bible, this too shall pass, even though it feels like a kidney stone right now. So they interject humor into it. And they say, if we say yes and do nothing, in 1 year, the results will be bad, and all these executives will be sent home, and there'll be a new batch. Till the right ones come and helps us to do the right thing, we're not going to do anything. And so this is what I call the cooperative sabotage, what the modern world refers to as the silent quitting. You probably have a lot of stories. Tell us a story about how you were able to help an organization overcome this inertia, because human beings are generally good. They don't want to do the wrong thing unless they're forced to.
No, look, that's absolutely right. I believe that same thing. People get up and come to work every day wanting to really achieve really great outcomes. And when they're stepping into their work environment, what they're really doing is they're parking their personal values and behaviours at the door, and they're actually taking on the organisations. And depending on how well organisations implement their values and behaviours frameworks will depend on whether they're actually aligning their behaviours to the organisation's expectations, or whether they're actually aligning them to the culture and how we do things around here. And that can be really, really quite challenging. So I've had a few different experiences in that space where even the most fundamental, lines being drawn around, behaviors and where people play and how they play with each other is a really, really important aspect. So I've walked into organizations and supported them in realigning and reaffirming the values and behaviors that they'd actually like to see that aligns with the culture that they need and want to move them towards their goals. I've also supported organizations in getting really clear about where those lines of accountability actually lie for each type of meeting, each type of role, rather, Cass. And it's one of those things too where organizations can be really great at documenting and drawing lines, but then leaders actually redefine those lines informally. So even though individual roles may have delegations of authority to undertake certain tasks and certain activities, what can happen is that just because you've got that delegation, your leader still doesn't trust or doesn't believe that the line's in the right spot. So they'll actually drive the individual in those roles to still check and gain approval and, cut across those lines of accountability so that they don't have the space they need to do the job they need to do. And I go into organizations and help them redefine those lines and get really, really clear about why those lines are there for which roles and for which purpose. And in a lot of cases, unfortunately, it tends to be more about distrust around leaders, not trusting individuals in roles, or when the leaders don't trust, there's typically a good reason, yet they've been quite avoidant about having the real conversation around development needs and having the right person in the right role with the right knowledge, skills and experience. They tend to, park people in roles and work around them as opposed to having the real conversation about having the right people in the right role where the roles are appropriately been, the lines have been defined appropriately and the delegations actually sit in the right place and space. So it's, a few different aspects of how I actually support businesses doing that. And again, from a heart-centeredness, Cass, it really does come back to what the intentions are of the individuals who are drawing those lines of accountability and holding those lines of accountability, and where they're actually coming from a true place where everyone wins. The organization wins, the individual wins, and the overarching environment and the shareholders win. So it's
an important thought process that folks forget, right? So the way you and I are having this conversation, to me, this head of HR and the head of finance working together instead of pulling in two different directions is so critical. And the conversation I always hear is finance has a seat at the table. HR doesn't. HR has to fight to get a seat at the table, fight to have the voices heard. And so much time is spent on that unnecessary jockeying position that we miss out the opportunity to bring these two elements, right? Bring the people and the holistic approach to people.
Yeah.
And the rules of engagement and the outcomes together. And we can naturally have governance as part of what we do. It doesn't have to be a separate project.
No, it doesn't. It really is an underlying part. And one of the challenges I find really drives that even further is around what the role of the executive team is as a collective. So when the HR professional does have a seat at the table in the executive environment, and so does the finance one, they're not there just representing their own streams. And they're not there from a silo-focused standpoint. Great managing directors and great CEOs recognize that there's some opportunity to actually leverage that collective thinking to the point where they can set up performance objectives for their senior leaders like the CFO and the general manager of human resources or the head of people and culture and say, ladies and gentlemen, the way it's going to work from a performance standpoint this year is that you are not successful in your finance role unless your HR colleague is successful. And you're not successful in the HR space unless your finance colleague is successful. So just like boards deliver decision-making from a collective overarching what's in the best interest of the whole organization standpoint, I'm seeing more and more that the executive teams are also expected by their managing director and CEO to do the same. So they're actually making decisions in a much more holistic way. And yes, I do represent the finance frameworks and the finance function. Yes, I do represent the HR function, but I'm here to make sure and enable and recognize that there are synergies between these environments. And we are part of my job isn't just to deliver HR functions, but leverage the synergy with finance and vice versa. And it actually is working a lot more effectively when people are really clear about the expectations on success and what success looks like at those senior levels.
And that also creates a culture of collaboration and co-creation.
Absolutely.
But just as you are talking, it's reminding me at Aon, we had a fundamental rule. Everybody's goals are to play one level up.
One level up.
Think of a sport. Let's pick football because Australia's plays soccer. I'm sitting in the Caribbean, huge soccer world. So let's talk soccer. If every player played their role and only played their role, the team is not going to win.
It's not a team.
Everybody has to show up and see what needs to happen for the team to win. And then they need to kick the ball to the right person who is positioned to get the goal in. Because the pursuit of the exercise is winning the game, not a person becoming the star, right? In basketball, I'm from Chicago, so I always say, Michael Jordan alone can't win a basketball game. In fact, if he's the only one who shows, he doesn't get to play the game.
No,
right?
That's exactly it. Not enough players on the field. Yep.
How do we give people the incentive to play one level up? So if every employee played for the team, every team played for the function, every function played for the organization, every organization played for the industry, then we are playing bigger. We're playing larger than life, and we are imagining it to be bigger instead of going smaller and smaller and becoming the smallest version of ourselves.
Oh, look, absolutely, Cass. It's a really, really great question. And I've actually thought about this from a couple of different perspectives. The way that I like seeing it is a pretty simple way. And it's this concept of around 1 + 1 = 3. And I know that 1 + 1 doesn't really equal 3 from a finance and from an accounting view or standpoint. But I love this concept around 1 + 1 = 3 because, one perspective and idea from one person with their knowledge, skills, and experience coming together with another person's knowledge, skills, and experience and perspective. If we can really understand each other, leverage, and get really, really clear about our own perspectives, when we actually come together and say, well, we're working for that next level up higher goal, what we actually create is a hybrid version, leveraging what I know and leveraging what you know to build something new that never existed before. And it's a really fundamental component to how I've seen really great executive teams and great boards recognize that leveraging that collective perspective of all of our experiences together takes us to that higher order place we would never have gotten to on our own. And being part of an environment where that actually occurs and recognizing that we created something that had never been created before. And my insights and perspective were just as valuable as yours. And it built us towards this place and space that didn't exist before we put our heads together is really quite exciting. And it enables people to, I think, be really passionate and enthusiastic about creating something new and different, leveraging and respecting each other's insights and perspectives. So
I love where you took this conversation, Lisa, because it opens up the door for us to approach diversity, including all of this as part of governance, right? Biology tells us when there is mixing of bloodlines, the generations are better looking, better functioning, physically, mentally, emotionally, right? The cross-pollination actually helps. Nature is showing us its cross-pollination that allows us to have food, right? Fruits and vegetables and grains and everything. And I'm a lover of food, so I'm going to go here. So the important thing is, imagine if I'm married to an American German, I'm Sri Lankan and lived in India for a while. So for us, when we cook, we blend flavors.
Yeah, fusion.
The Italian and the German can benefit from the Sri Lankan and the Indian, and vice versa. And how many of us love fusion cooking? How many of us even know the Italian noodles actually came from the Chinese to Europe?
Chinese. Yep,
Okay.
absolutely.
So it's the give and take and the recreation with a different take is what makes everything vibrant, right? If everything stayed in its purest form, we'll only have red and yellow and blue, no other color.
No other colors.
We wouldn't have different flavors. We wouldn't have cuisine. We wouldn't have all these amazing looking people. Life would be boring.
Oh, look,
So look at it as a vibrancy thing.
Yeah, look, I think you're absolutely right. And that ability to adapt and adopt and getting really, really clear about what is useful and what can we use in our backpacks that effectively can be applied in that particular situation, and how can we adopt it in a way where everyone really wants to own it and use it and really enjoy it, passionately enjoy it, which is what you're talking about. And I'm with you in the food space. I'm a half Maltese and half Italian, so I've got quite a bit of blending going on, and I'm a first generation Australian, so there's a lot of blending going on obviously around me every day. I'm totally with you around that. And there's this really important piece that comes as part of this, the underlying part from an organizational standpoint. And that is that we need to remember that we tend to naturally hire in our own image. So when we've got someone sitting in front of us and we're interviewing them for roles, that relatability and how we feel they'll fit into the culture that we think we need really is more about us personally, and not necessarily about the fact that the organization needs that diversity of thinking. And also really recognizing that when we are hiring someone that isn't in our own image, we need to be very, very clear with ourselves around, as a heart-centered governing leader, how do we trust just because someone's different or a concept is different or it's new for us? How do we actually open the door and enable those individuals to be able to participate fully and wholeheartedly, even though their perspective may not actually align with ours? And how do we take that on in a really, really open and effective way? It is a real challenge for leaders to be able to do that and recognize that. And it takes them coming from the heart and not from the head for them to be able to do that effectively.
Absolutely. And so a good leader knows to bring their heart, mind, and their action, right?
Absolutely.
So I am going to open this up. We have Wolfgang, who is an HR leader for the Duracell brand of Berkshire Hathaway. And we have Marquis here, who actually works with organizations to bring about that governance in the HR space for diversity of thoughts and actions. So let's invite them in. Go ahead, Wolfgang.
Well, first of all, good morning, good evening, Lisa. It's good to see. I saw the note from Dr. Cass in LinkedIn, and I was like, oh, great! I'd love to hear about your thoughts on governance, because we always, and in HR, we say HR, not HR, but that's okay. Yeah. we always looking at those situations. And the other part of that is that what I see here is that you live in Sydney, Australia, or are from there. And that's on my bucket list of places to go visit. I am also a foodie, and also enjoy the pairing of wines. So it's like Australia is right up there on my list of places. And so hopefully Dr. Cass and I can do some work over there. I'll be so excited to collaborate with you at some point. So
lovely.
Thank you. So listening to you, I was going to ask you a question, and then you started answering it, because I see, in my experience, a connection between the company values and the impact of governance. So, have you, when you go into a company, is that something you quickly focus on, and what has been the main value that you say, if they had just this will be something that will improve their situation and how they handle governance?
Yeah, look, most definitely. There's a few things I look for when I go into organizations, and I typically do a little bit of an audit or a review of what great governance looks like based on a framework that I have. And I do find 9 times out of 10 that the ethics and values framework tends to be an area that they really do need to focus on. And the main reason for that, Wolfgang, is because leaders tell me that all of those behavior sides of things tends to be the area where it keeps them awake at night the most, where individuals are not quite delivering on the expected behaviors. And what I find for organizations that do have defined values and behaviors is that they're not reinforcing them, and that they don't have a program to remind people how to actually apply them and apply them effectively. So there's quite a few opportunities for me to support them in putting a program together where they actually bring everyone together and remind them what the values and behaviors are, get them to sign back onto them, but also have some scenarios or some situations where there's some shades of grey. Things are not black and white. What do we do in this situation? And use the values and behaviors as a tool to help them make effective decisions when managing through those shades of grey. What I find in a lot of cases too is that organizations might have values and behaviors defined, but what they don't have, also they do have them defined, but what they've got is behaviors. What do the behaviors look like from a positive aspect standpoint? And sometimes they need support in defining what the behaviors don't look like from a negative aspect standpoint. And just defining those really, really cleanly actually helps leaders with performance conversations. So when we have a value of integrity, integrity looks like this for us. Integrity doesn't look like this. And so when people are signing on to the values and behaviors and being really clear that they're being employed and they've got to leave their personal values at the door and adopt the organization's ones, they're really clear of what they are and what they aren't, and also how to apply them during those times of shades of grey. And having a nice little decision-making framework to support them doing that also supports and helps as well. So, yeah.
Brilliant question, Wolfgang. And I love how you took that question on, Lisa.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. And what I think are additionally important is after something happens, debrief as a team.
Yeah.
What worked, what didn't work, what did we learn? Because it creates transparency, it creates learning opportunities, and it creates the psychological safety network where the executive leadership is comfortable talking to people, right? And it also then holds everybody accountable for having the courage to live the values. Coming from the financial services sector, having been a CFO for multi-billion-dollar organizations, what I find is everybody has values, but they pick and choose when to live it.
They do.
And not having the courage to live the value when all the chips are down means you don't have values.
Well, this is exactly it.
If you're not betting the farm on what you consider your value, you don't have values.
You don't have values.
And that is something that organizational leaders forget.
Yeah.
I always say values are like being pregnant. A woman is never a little bit pregnant. You can't have a little bit values. You're either pregnant or not. You're either governance centric and heart centric or not.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as a little bit.
Yeah. And the only other comment I was going to add is because I've seen it in a couple of places that I worked where the values are just nice things on the wall that either they put on a nice frame or they actually even paste them on the wall, but they're not lived. And the living the values, you can see it in the culture. You can smell it in the culture, And so one thing that I tried to do is particularly in critical roles as we bring people in higher levels in the organization, I insert myself they ask me now, but it's like, can you talk to this person and understand if we have a match in values and culture? Because while it's important to bring different ways of thinking, it's also can be very difficult if you bring somebody whose values are very different. And so I hopefully expect that people don't, as least as possible, or at least amount, check their values at the door. Hopefully they bring them in because they should be the same. Well, we hope that they're the same or close enough.
Yeah. Look, you're absolutely correct, Wolfgang. And great organizations use the values and behaviors as a foundational element to when they interview to bring people into the business. So you're absolutely correct. The ideal thing is that you've got the organization's values defined and they're hiring people that match those values so that they're not actually leaving. They don't need to leave different values set at the door. And that's where things get hard because there's that mismatch. Their personal values and the organizations don't match. And it's very, very hard to take on a very, very different value set. In fact, it doesn't work. So in a lot of environments where I'm building values and behaviors for the first time with the business, we go through a process of getting a cross-section of people across the organization to help create and define the ideal values and behaviors to move them towards their goals. And typically after that, there is actually some individuals that end up moving along and moving to different roles because the expectations are here now and, they're just not matched. And the tolerance levels, once you draw those governing lines of accountability, those the tolerance levels for that mismatch isn't there anymore. And some hard conversations have to be had and some hard decisions need to be made, unfortunately. But that's the reality. That's the reality for organizations moving towards their goals. They need the right people with the right knowledge, skills, experience, and right attitude to deliver.
And
thank you. But so I'm looking forward. I'm sorry, I'll go, Dr. Castles. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person someday. Maybe we can all go on the road because I'm also a big believer that 1 + 1 should be more than 2. And the organizational culture and the leadership has a lot to do in making that reality. So that's it.
Thank you.
And it's so critical for the tone at the top to be right, because we can't expect everything to fall into place if the tone at the top is not. Let me invite Marquise. Marquise, go ahead.
First of all, this has been a master class because I've been sitting back, Googling, reading, studying you, looking up corporate governance, just going, wow, this is a whole world that's essential. And what's interesting, Dr. Kaz, is, and Lisa, thank you so much because I'm learning it. I would have not taken the dive that I took today, except for everything that you talked about. And what we're building, to me, is a corporation designed around corporate governance. It's essentially, from my very limited perspective, we are trying to create a company that looks at humanitarian or humans as the #1 focus of our existence. And in a way that allows all of us to show up. And so I'm learning that corporate governance is the way that's guided. It's how that's maintained. And so it's a very interesting perspective and mind-opening moment for me. And so I'd like to just comment 2 more things because I'm really just listening today. Is 1, I look forward to meeting you because of what you do, and wow, it totally makes sense. 2, Wolfgang, you and Dr. Kaz will not be the only ones going to Australia. It's always been a desire of mine since I was a little boy. And 3, thank you. I'm going to continue to just study and learn because I would think every corporation had this in place, but as we see, they don't. And that's probably why we have most of the issues we're experiencing. So thank you for your contribution. And again, I'm a student. I'm just taking it in.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Come on down to Sydney. I'll say hi. I'll meet you here. Wolfgang, you're welcome. You're very welcome, Marquise. Come on down.
Yes. So as they both work in the human capital space, right? Beautiful. So Marquise is creating an organization that allows people to live their values and live their purpose so that they are visible in the way they show up and they contribute. And Wolfgang works with, Wolfgang and I are partners. I come from the world of finance. He comes from the world of HR, and we've traveled and worked across the whole world trying to build the new Duracell organization. So I see the value both of them bring, and I see the heart-centric, human-centric approach that is needed, that is lacking. So that's what made this conversation so vibrant today, Lisa. And the fact that you opened up with the desire to bring that heart-centered leadership to governance instead of just the tick the box exercise people seem to think. So what, if you were to give one piece of advice to organizations to get on the road for real, holistic, sustainable governance ecosystem, what would that be?
The one piece of advice I'd give organizations is to recognize that governance is more than just the documentation that you need to have ready when audit come by. There are three really important elements to delivering great governance. And that is, yes, you need the documentation and frameworks and all those lines drawn, as a show me, but you also need to be really clear about the culture you have and the culture you want. And the third component is to recognize that the mindsets of individuals across your organization, from leadership all the way across, all the way down, is really fundamental to delivering really, really great governance. You need all three elements. It's not just about the paperwork and just about those defined lines. It is culture, and it is also most definitely the mindsets.
So folks, make note of those nuggets of wisdom, because we're going to need to integrate that into the way we live, the way we show up, and the way we function. And remember, governance is not just for corporations, governance is for society too.
Society.
The way we show up in society needs to be governance centric, because the governing bodies, our governments, cannot be about their political posturing. They have to also understand that the three elements of organization, the society, and the individual has to be balanced. In democracies, we as individuals need to understand that I, as an individual, need to balance the need of the society and the underlying organizations that make society functional. And if we all showed up that way, this world would be a much better place that we would all be happy living. So with that, Lisa, how can folks get a hold of you? How can they stay in touch with you? How can they continue to engage with you?
Oh, I would love to hear from anyone who'd love to engage with me. The best way to contact me and spend a little bit of time working through and continuing this conversation is to jump onto my website, which is www.governancecollective.com.au, and you'll find an invitation on the site to book in for a complimentary consultation or a complimentary discovery session. And so I'm currently offering 1 hour free sessions for people to book in, and we can continue the conversation that way.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lisa. It's been so much fun. The hour just flew by. I can't even imagine where the hour went. But we definitely will be continuing this conversation in different ways, whether it's running workshops in the Caribbean, in the United States, in Australia, in Asia. The world needs to have this conversation. And it's a matter of bringing different perspectives, people from different professions coming together to show the world that we truly have to work collectively on this. So thank you for opening up the conversation. Thank you for putting the scenario on the table so that we can continue this and build a better world. And as I always remind us, every human interaction is an opportunity for our transformation. So having met Lisa, we are better off because of this relationship, because of this hour. Let's continue the conversation, go out there and learn and transform. And in the process, let's make sure we make every ecosystem we're a part of sustainable.